I paid $12,000 for this seat, and I refuse to sit next to him. The words had not even been spoken yet, but the tension that would lead to them had already begun hours earlier in a quiet corner of John F. Kennedy International Airport. But that moment was still coming. Right now, the camera would find a different man. Ethan Walker stood alone in the Platinum Sky Lounge overlooking the runway, staring out at the blinking red lights of aircraft taxiing through the dark. At 54, Ethan had the still posture of a man who had spent decades learning how to control a room without raising his voice. Tall, lean, his silver threaded two-headed hair was combed back with the precision of habit, not vanity. The Italian suit he wore was charcoal and flawless, the kind of tailoring that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt and checked the weight of the vintage Rolex Daytona on his wrist. 9:42 in the evening. On the polished marble table beside him sat a leather briefcase that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Inside that briefcase were documents worth 8 figures. A hostile acquisition, a housing complex in Chicago that had stood for 40 years. Families lived there. Children had grown up in those brick buildings. Ethan planned to demolish it and build luxury condos with rooftop pools and glass balconies that looked down on a neighborhood that could no longer afford to exist. He didn't feel guilt. Ethan Walker didn't build his empire by feeling things. He built it by calculating. Across the lounge, a young airport concierge named Melissa hesitated before approaching him. She looked barely 26, her hair pulled tight into a bun that had started to loosen near her temples after a long shift. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully, forcing the polite smile she'd practiced in training. "Your car to the aircraft is ready." Ethan didn't turn immediately. He finished reading the email on his phone first. A message from his chief financial officer confirming the final signatures for the London deal. The numbers glowed on the screen. $14.8 million. Profit. Then he slipped the phone into his pocket and looked at Melissa like someone noticing a chair. "About time," he said. Melissa swallowed. "We try to coordinate boarding, too." "The Wi-Fi in this lounge is terrible," Ethan cut in calmly. "If you're going to charge membership fees this high, someone should make sure the network actually works." Melissa nodded quickly. "I'll pass that along." He already knew she wouldn't. But it didn't matter. Ethan picked up his briefcase and walked past her without another word. No thank you. No eye contact. Just the faint scent of expensive cologne trailing behind him as he stepped through the private door that led to the waiting car. Out on the tarmac, the night air carried the roar of jet engines and the distant metallic clatter of ground crews preparing aircraft for departure. The black airport vehicle rolled across the concrete toward a massive Boeing 777 illuminated under floodlights. Flight 9002 to London, first class. Ethan leaned back in the leather seat of the car and closed his eyes briefly as the aircraft came closer. To him, flying first class wasn't luxury. It was confirmation, a signal that he had risen above the crowd, above the noise, above people. The car stopped at the bottom of the jet bridge. A tall purser named Daniel Harris waited at the door, standing perfectly straight in his Navy uniform. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Walker," Daniel said warmly. Ethan handed him his coat without slowing his stride. "Seat 1A, Ethan said. Scotch, single malt, double." Daniel nodded. Of course. Inside, the first-class cabin glowed with soft amber lighting, wide leather seats, polished wood panels, the quiet hum of climate control. It felt like a private sanctuary floating above the chaos of the world. Ethan liked that. But tonight, something was different. The aircraft had undergone a last-minute equipment swap earlier in the day, which meant the layout in the nose of the plane had changed. Instead of a single private suite, there were 2 seats, side by side, 1A and 1B. Ethan slowed as he rounded the corner. For a moment he didn't react. He simply stared. In seat 1B sat a man who looked like he had wandered in from another world. He was about 38, broad-shouldered, calm. A short beard framed his jaw, and his eyes moved slowly across the pages of a thick medical journal resting on his lap. He wore a grey hoodie, not designer, not branded, just simple cotton fabric, softened by years of washing. Noise-cancelling headphones rested around his neck. His name was Marcus Bennett. But Ethan Walker didn't know that yet. What Ethan saw instead was something that violated the picture he had in his mind. First-class passengers, in his experience, looked a certain way. Older, white, corporate, tailored suits, polished shoes, people who spoke the language of money. This man didn't fit that image. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Ethan's jaw tightened. A vein appeared faintly at his temple. Without sitting down, he turned sharply and walked back toward the galley. Daniel Harris nearly collided with him while carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "Is everything all right, Mr. Walker?" Daniel asked. Ethan leaned in slightly. His voice stayed low, controlled, but the venom inside it was unmistakable. "Who is that in seat 1B?" Daniel blinked. "That is Dr. Marcus Bennett, sir. He's one of our frequent flyers." "I don't care if he's the King of England," Ethan replied coldly. Daniel felt the temperature of the conversation drop instantly. Ethan continued, his eyes narrowing. "He doesn't belong there." Daniel straightened slightly. "Sir, he purchased that seat the same way you did." Ethan gave a short laugh. But it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "I paid $12,000 for privacy and prestige," he said quietly, "not to sit next to someone who looks like he wandered in from Coach." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Around them, the quiet cabin hummed softly. Passengers were still boarding. Time was ticking. But Ethan Walker wasn't finished. His finger lifted slowly and pointed toward the front row. "Move him," Ethan said. Daniel's expression hardened. "I can't do that, sir." For the first time that night, Ethan Walker's smile appeared. But it was the kind of smile that had ended careers. And in exactly 30 minutes, as the plane climbed over the Atlantic, that same smile would disappear. Because the man Ethan Walker had just demanded be removed from his seat was the only person on that aircraft who could keep his heart from stopping. Ethan Walker stepped back into the first-class cabin with the quiet confidence of a man who had never been told no in any room that mattered. The amber lights reflected off polished walnut panels. Crystal glasses clinked softly somewhere behind him. A businessman in row 2 glanced up from the Financial Times, then quickly looked back down. People recognized tension when they saw it, and Ethan carried tension like a thundercloud. Marcus Bennett was still in seat 1B, still reading, still calm. The thick medical journal rested open across his lap. His eyes moved steadily across the page, as if nothing in the world around him had changed. Ethan stopped beside the seat and stared down at him. Marcus sensed the presence before he heard anything. He slowly lifted his eyes. The headphones slid from his neck into his hand. His expression wasn't defensive. It wasn't confrontational. It was curious. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked. His voice was deep, smooth, and carried the quiet tone of someone used to thinking before speaking. Ethan didn't sit. He stood over him. "You're in my space." Marcus glanced around the wide cabin. The seats were enormous, each one surrounded by polished wood and soft leather. There was more room here than most people had in their living rooms. "I believe this is seat 1B, Marcus replied calmly. "My boarding pass says 1B. Ethan leaned closer. "I don't care what your boarding pass says." The woman in seat 2A slowly lowered her sunglasses. A tech founder in row 3 paused his podcast. The low murmur of boarding passengers faded as the tension sharpened. Marcus closed the journal and placed it neatly on the tray table. "I don't intend to disturb you," he said. Ethan's lips curled. "Your presence disturbs me." The sentence landed like a dropped plate in a silent restaurant. Daniel Harris appeared again at the edge of the aisle, sensing the temperature shift in the cabin. "Mr. Walker," Daniel said carefully, "we are preparing for departure. If you could please take your seat, I am not sitting here," Ethan interrupted. His voice rose just enough that several passengers turned their heads. He pointed directly at Marcus. "This man is clearly out of place." Marcus didn't move. He simply watched Ethan with the same steady expression. Ethan continued. "I suspect he used a stolen credit card or some kind of upgrade mistake. You should verify his identification immediately." A ripple moved through the cabin. Daniel felt heat rising behind his collar. "Sir, Dr. Bennett is a verified passenger." "Look at him," Ethan said sharply. He gestured toward the grey hoodie. "This is first class, not a bus terminal." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained seated. Daniel spoke again, firmer now. "Doctor, Bennett paid for that seat." Ethan leaned closer to Daniel. "I don't feel safe." The words were soft, but deliberate. Daniel blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said I don't feel safe sitting next to him," Ethan repeated. Now the entire front cabin was watching. Marcus slowly exhaled. Ethan's voice dropped into a whisper filled with contempt. "Move him." Daniel's back straightened. "I can't do that." Ethan turned back toward Marcus. For the first time, his voice sharpened like broken glass. "Get out of my sight." Marcus didn't react immediately. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel the weight of it. Then Marcus slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. The click echoed through the cabin. He stood, and when he did, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. Marcus Bennett was taller. Broad shoulders filled the narrow aisle space. The hoodie hung loosely over a powerful frame that looked built by years of disciplined work rather than gym vanity. For half a second, Ethan stepped back instinctively, but Marcus raised no fists. He turned toward Daniel. "I don't want to delay the flight," Marcus said quietly. Daniel opened his mouth. "Dr. Bennett, you do not have to. It's fine." Marcus's voice was calm. He reached for his bag beneath the seat. "If there's another seat available, I'll take it." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. The woman in 2A shook her head slowly. The tech founder whispered something under his breath. Daniel looked torn. "We have a premium economy seat in row 20, he said reluctantly. "But this situation will be documented." "Document whatever you like," Ethan said immediately. He dropped into seat 1A with a satisfied sigh and stretched his arms across the leather armrests, like a king reclaiming a throne. Marcus paused beside him for a moment. Their eyes met. Ethan expected anger, expected humiliation. Instead, he saw something else. Pity. Marcus spoke softly enough that only Ethan could hear. "The air is just as thin back there as it is up here." Then he stepped into the aisle. "Try to remember that." Ethan waved him away like smoke. "Back where you belong." Marcus walked down the aisle. The curtain separating first class from the rest of the aircraft swayed gently as he passed through it. For a moment, the cabin remained silent. Then the quiet sounds of pre-flight returned. Glasses, seatbelts, muted voices. But something had changed. The businessman in row 2 glanced at Ethan with open disgust before returning to his newspaper. The woman in 2A turned her seat slightly away. Daniel Harris handed Ethan the scotch he had requested earlier. But the warmth was gone from his voice. "Your drink, Mr. Walker." Ethan took the glass and leaned back. The amber liquid caught the cabin lights. Finally. The seat beside him was empty, exactly the way he preferred it. He took a slow sip and closed his eyes as the engines outside began to roar. To Ethan Walker, takeoff had always been his favorite moment. The moment when gravity pushed you into the seat. The moment when the ground disappeared. The moment when you rose above everyone else. The Boeing 777 thundered down the runway. Metal trembled. Passengers gripped their armrests, and Ethan Walker smiled. What he didn't know was that somewhere in row 20, Dr. Marcus Bennett was gently bouncing a crying infant for a tired young mother who had been traveling alone for 10 hours. He didn't know that the man he had just banished from first class had spent the last 15 years saving lives in operating rooms most surgeons would refuse to enter. He didn't know that 3 hours from now, somewhere over the dark Atlantic Ocean, his own heart would begin to fail. And the only man capable of stopping death was sitting in the back of the plane. The Boeing 777 climbed steadily into the black sky above the Atlantic, engines roaring like distant thunder before fading into the deep, steady hum that only long-haul travelers truly understood. Inside the cabin, the lights dimmed slightly, soft and golden, designed to trick the body into calm. But calm was not the same thing everywhere on the aircraft. In seat 1A, Ethan Walker was comfortable. Very comfortable. The leather seat had already reclined halfway. The polished wood table in front of him held a crystal glass filled with 12-year single malt scotch. The ice rotated slowly as the aircraft leveled at 38,000 feet. Ethan lifted the glass and inhaled the scent like a ritual. Across the aisle, a man in row 2 pretended to read the Financial Times, but kept glancing up every few seconds. The earlier confrontation still lingered in the air, like the faint smell of smoke after a fire. Ethan ignored him. He had won. The seat beside him was empty now. Wide, quiet, private. Exactly what he had paid for. Daniel Harris approached with the dinner menu. His smile was technically correct, but the warmth had cooled several degrees. "Dinner service will begin shortly, Mr. Walker," Daniel said. Ethan barely looked up from his laptop screen. "Lobster thermidor," Ethan said. "And another scotch." Daniel nodded once. Of course, Ethan's laptop displayed architectural renderings of a Chicago property. Brick apartments, 4 floors, built in the 1970s. Cheap, functional, temporary. His company planned to demolish it within the year. In its place would rise a glass tower. Luxury penthouses, rooftop gardens, underground parking. The projected profit number glowed on the screen. Ethan smiled faintly. People called it gentrification. Ethan called it evolution. He typed a note to his legal team confirming the demolition timeline. Outside the window, the sky was a deep, endless black. No city lights, no horizon. Just darkness and the faint reflection of his own face in the glass. Meanwhile, 20 rows behind him, the atmosphere felt very different. Row 20 was cramped. The seats were narrower. The air was warmer and filled with the constant soft noise of passengers shifting, coughing, whispering. Dr. Marcus Bennett sat quietly beside a young woman struggling with a restless baby. Her name was Emily Carter. She looked exhausted. The infant in her arms cried with sharp, desperate bursts that cut through the dim cabin like alarms. A few passengers nearby had already begun casting irritated glances in her direction. Emily tried to mix formula with one hand while bouncing the baby with the other. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the people around her. "He's just having trouble with the pressure." Marcus leaned slightly toward her. "Here," he said gently. Emily looked up, surprised. Marcus held out his hand. "Let me help with the bottle." Emily hesitated for half a second before passing it to him. The baby continued crying. Marcus warmed his hands together slowly. Then he reached forward and placed 2 fingers gently behind the baby's ear, pressing a small pressure point along the jawline. He made a soft clicking sound with his tongue. Within seconds, the baby's cries faltered. The tiny chest heaved once. Then the infant released a loud burp and fell silent. Emily stared. "How did you do that?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Cabin pressure bothers their ears. That spot helps release it." Emily laughed softly in disbelief. "Are you a pediatrician or something?" Marcus shook his head. "Neurosurgeon?" Her eyes widened. "You're kidding." Marcus shrugged. "Mostly trauma surgery." Emily looked at him differently now. Not just another passenger. Someone capable. Someone calm. For the next 2 hours, Marcus helped entertain the baby, while Emily finally leaned back and closed her eyes for the first time since boarding. Meanwhile, in the front cabin, Ethan Walker was finishing his second scotch. The lobster plate sat half empty on his tray. Butter glistened under the warm light. The action movie playing on his screen exploded with gunfire and orchestral music. Ethan barely watched. He was reviewing contracts again. Profit projections, demolition permits, everything exactly where it should be. Everything under control. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed further. Passengers drifted into sleep. The engines hummed like distant machinery in a dream. And then Ethan woke up. Not slowly. Not peacefully. His eyes snapped open. Something felt wrong. At first it was subtle, a strange flutter in his chest. He frowned and adjusted his tie. Indigestion, he thought. Too much butter. He reached for his water glass. His hand trembled. The glass tipped over. Water spilled across his lap. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. He tried to stand. His legs felt heavy. Very heavy. A wave of nausea slammed into him. The cabin air suddenly felt thin. He inhaled deeply. The breath didn't fill his lungs. Again. Still nothing. Panic began rising in his chest like frin. Ethan Walker did not panic. He controlled markets. He controlled people. But he could not control his own heart. His left arm tingled, then went numb. The pressure in his chest exploded. It felt like something enormous had dropped onto his sternum. His vision blurred. "Jeffrey," he tried to call, but the word came out as a wet rasp. His hand slammed repeatedly against the call button. Ding, ding, ding. Daniel Harris rushed from the galley. At first he looked annoyed by the repeated chime. Then he saw Ethan's face. The color had drained completely from his skin. Sweat poured down his temples. His eyes were wide with terror. Ethan clutched his chest like a man trying to hold his own heart inside his body. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the seat. "Mr. Walker," Ethan gasped. "Help!" Daniel spun toward the galley. "Medical emergency in first class," he shouted. The calm cabin shattered instantly. Passengers jolted awake. A woman screamed softly. The tech founder in row 3 lifted his phone and began recording. Daniel grabbed the intercom. His voice echoed through the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board. If there is a doctor on this aircraft, please identify yourself immediately." Ethan heard the announcement through a haze of pain. "Doctor. Yes, a doctor." His vision darkened around the edges. A short man in row 4 jumped up quickly. "I'm a doctor," he said. Daniel waved him forward. The man knelt beside Ethan and grabbed his wrist. "I'm Dr. Alan Peters," he said quickly. "Podiatrist. I know CPR. A foot doctor." Ethan's fading mind screamed silently. Dr. Peters looked frightened. His fingers trembled as he checked Ethan's pulse. "It's racing," Peters muttered. "Pulse may be 140. Could be a heart attack. Does anyone have aspirin?" The pain grew worse. Much worse. Ethan felt the world slipping away from him. He was going to die. Here. Over the ocean. Then suddenly the crowd parted. Heavy footsteps rushed forward from the back of the plane. A voice cut through the chaos like a command. "Move." Dr. Marcus Bennett stepped into the aisle. His grey hoodie was still smeared faintly with baby formula. His eyes locked onto Ethan Walker. And in that moment, Ethan realized something horrifying. The man he had thrown out of first class was now the only person between him and death. Marcus Bennett moved through the aisle with the controlled speed of a man who had walked into chaos many times before. Passengers instinctively shifted aside as he approached the front of the cabin. Phones hovered in the air. Faces stretched tight with fear and curiosity. The first-class cabin, moments ago a sanctuary of quiet luxury, now felt like the center of a storm. Ethan Walker was barely conscious. His expensive silk shirt clung to his chest, soaked in sweat. His eyes rolled slightly under half-closed lids. Each breath sounded wrong, wet, shallow, like air trying to pass through something broken. Dr. Alan Peters still knelt beside him, gripping Ethan's wrist with trembling fingers. "I think it's a myocardial infarction," Peters said, his voice cracking. "Pulse is erratic. He's in distress. We need a defibrillator." Marcus crouched beside them. His eyes didn't go to the panic. They went to the body. He watched Ethan's chest rise. Left eye moving, right side barely shifting. Marcus pressed 2 fingers against Ethan's neck and felt the carotid pulse. Fast, weak. His gaze shifted to Ethan's throat. The veins along the side of the neck bulged like thick cords. Marcus leaned closer. "Flashlight," he said calmly. Daniel Harris fumbled in the galley drawer and handed him a small pen light. Marcus shone it along Ethan's neck and chest. "Jugular vein distension," Marcus muttered quietly. Dr. Peters looked confused. "What?" Marcus placed his ear against Ethan's chest. On the left side he heard the rush of air. On the right side, nothing. Silence. Marcus sat back on his heels. "His trachea's shifted," he said. Daniel blinked. "What does that mean?" Marcus looked at Ethan again. The color of his skin had changed. Gray, lips tinged blue. "He's not having a heart attack," Marcus said. Dr. Peters stared. "But the chest pain, the sweating, it's a tension pneumothorax." The words landed heavily. No one in the small crowd around them spoke. Marcus continued calmly. "His lung has collapsed. Air is leaking into the chest cavity and building pressure. Every breath pumps more air in. But it can't escape." He pointed briefly to Ethan's chest. "That pressure is crushing the lung and pushing his heart sideways. If we don't release it within 5 minutes, his heart stops." The tech founder in row 3 lowered his phone slightly. "Is that bad?" he asked quietly. Marcus looked at him with a level stare. "It means he dies." Daniel's throat tightened. "We're 3 hours from London." Marcus nodded once. "Then we treat him here." Ethan's eyes fluttered open slightly. Through the haze of oxygen starvation, he saw Marcus's face above him. The same man he had humiliated. The same man he had thrown out of first class. For a moment, the memory returned sharply. The pointing finger. The word thug. The smug smile. Ethan tried to speak. No sound came out. Marcus turned to Daniel. "Emergency medical kit." Daniel scrambled to the overhead compartment and dragged down a large Reds. He dropped it beside Marcus and unzipped it. Bandages, aspirin, basic airway tubes, epinephrine. Marcus searched quickly. His movements were precise, controlled. Then his jaw tightened. "Where's the decompression needle?" Daniel froze. "The what?" "A 14-gauge needle, 3 inches long." Daniel's face went pale. "I don't think we carry that." Marcus dumped the entire kit onto the floor. Scissors, tape, gauze, but no needle. Dr. Peters stared in horror. "You're saying we can't treat this?" Marcus's voice dropped into something darker. "You're saying the equipment required by aviation medical protocol is missing?" Daniel whispered, "I'm sorry." Marcus exhaled slowly. Around them, the cabin felt smaller by the second. Ethan's breathing worsened. His chest barely moved now. Dr. Peters looked frantic. "We need to divert the plane." Daniel shook his head helplessly. "We're over the middle of the Atlantic. The captain said there's nowhere close enough." Marcus looked down at Ethan. The man's skin had turned mottled grey. His eyes were fading. 5 minutes, maybe less now. Marcus stood. The passengers watched silently. Phones still recording. Marcus scanned the cabin quickly. Then he spoke. "We improvise." Dr. Peters blinked. "With what?" Marcus pointed toward the galley. "Alcohol. Highest proof you have." Daniel ran. Marcus continued. "A metal coat hanger. Pliers from the maintenance kit." The tech founder lowered his phone further. Marcus turned to him. "And bring me a steak knife." The words shocked the cabin. "A steak knife?" someone whispered. Marcus didn't raise his voice. "Unless you'd prefer he dies." Daniel returned seconds later, carrying a bottle of vodka, shaking slightly. The tech founder handed over a steak knife from the galley tray. Marcus grabbed Ethan's tie and ripped it free. Buttons from the silk shirt popped across the floor as Marcus tore the fabric open. Ethan's chest was swollen on the right side. Tight, rigid. Marcus poured vodka over the skin. The smell of alcohol filled the cabin. Then he poured some over his hands and the knife. Dr. Peters looked sick. "You're not seriously going to," Marcus cut him off. "If I don't, he has maybe 2 minutes left." He leaned close to Ethan's ear. "Listen to me." Ethan's eyes flickered weakly. "You can hear me." Marcus spoke clearly. "Your lung collapsed. I'm going to cut into your chest and release the pressure. I don't have anesthesia. It will hurt." Ethan couldn't nod, but a single tear slid down his temple. Marcus took that as consent. He stood again. "Everyone who doesn't want to see blood should turn away." The plane suddenly lurched violently. The seatbelt sign flashed. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are encountering severe turbulence. Flight attendants, take your seats immediately." The aircraft dropped. Passengers screamed. Daniel grabbed the armrest to keep from falling. "Doctor, we need to strap in." Marcus shook his head. "If I stop now, he dies before the turbulence does." The plane shuddered again. Marcus steadied his hand against Ethan's rib cage. His voice was calm, almost surgical. "Second intercostal space," he murmured. He pressed the knife tip against Ethan Walker's chest and pushed. The blade broke the skin with a wet resistance that Marcus Bennett felt through the handle of the steak knife. Ethan Walker's eyes shot open. His body jerked violently against the seat. A sound tried to escape his throat, but the collapsing lung stole the air before it could become a scream. What came out instead was a strangled animal groan that made several passengers turn away immediately. "Hold him," Marcus said. Daniel Harris leaned forward and pinned Ethan's shoulders down against the leather seat. The plane dropped again. Not a gentle glide. A violent plunge that lifted trays and glasses into the air for a fraction of a second before gravity slammed everything back down. A glass shattered somewhere behind them. Passengers screamed. Marcus didn't look up. His entire world had narrowed to a 2-inch patch of skin between Ethan Walker's ribs. He pushed the knife deeper. The serrated edge cut through fat and muscle slowly, the blade sawing in short, precise strokes because it was never meant to be a surgical instrument. Blood welled up immediately, dark red against pale skin. Dr. Alan Peters backed away 2 steps, his hands raised like someone witnessing a crime scene. "You're cutting him open," Peters whispered in disbelief. Marcus didn't answer. He kept working. The turbulence shook the aircraft again. The overhead bins rattled like a storm, shaking windows. Marcus braced his elbow against the armrest to steady the knife. He could feel the intercostal muscles resisting the blade. He cut deeper. Ethan's body arched again under Daniel's grip. "Don't let him move," Marcus said through clenched teeth. Daniel leaned harder, using his full weight to hold Ethan down. Sweat rolled down Marcus's temple and dripped onto the blood spreading across Ethan's chest. The smell of vodka, iron, and fear filled the cabin. "Tube," Marcus said. Daniel grabbed the hollow plastic shell Marcus had torn from a ballpoint pen seconds earlier. The ink cartridge had been thrown aside. The pen casing was crude but hollow. It would work. Maybe. Marcus pushed the knife tip through the final layer. The pleura, the thin membrane lining the chest cavity. For a moment, there was resistance. Then the blade punched through with a sudden pop. Instantly, a loud hissing sound erupted, like a tar exploding. Air blasted out of the wound under pressure, carrying a spray of blood mist that speckled Marcus's grey hoodie. Several passengers gasped. One woman covered her mouth. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled the knife out and jammed the hollow pen casing into the opening. The hiss grew louder. Air rushed through the tube with violent force. Ethan's chest shuddered. His entire body went limp. "He stopped breathing," Daniel shouted. "You killed him." Marcus wiped blood from his eyes with the back of his wrist. "Watch." 10 seconds passed. The plane still shook. The engines roared louder as the pilots fought the turbulence. Ethan lay motionless. Then suddenly his chest rose, one ragged inhale, then another. Air rushed into his lungs again. Color began creeping slowly back into his face. The purple tint faded from his lips, the veins along his neck flattened. Marcus leaned closer and checked the carotid pulse. Strong. Stronger than before. He exhaled slowly. The pressure's off the heart. Daniel stared in disbelief. "He's alive?" Marcus nodded. "Barely. But yes." The hissing from the pen tube continued in steady bursts as trapped air escaped from the chest cavity. Around them the cabin had fallen silent, except for the engines and Ethan's labored breathing. Then slowly, someone began clapping. It was the tech founder from row 3. The sound echoed awkwardly at first. Then the woman in seat 2A joined. Soon the entire front cabin filled with applause. Marcus ignored it. He reached for medical tape from the emergency kit and secured the pen casing firmly against Ethan's chest. Then he tore a finger from a rubber glove and stretched it over the end of the tube. "A flutter valve," Marcus muttered. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "It lets air out, but not back in." He pressed the improvised valve carefully into place and secured it. Ethan groaned softly. His eyelids fluttered. The world returned slowly. Pain came first, then breath, then awareness, his eyes focused on the man leaning over him. Marcus Bennett. Blood covered Marcus's hands. Blood soaked into the sleeve of the same hoodie Ethan had mocked earlier. Ethan tried to speak. Marcus placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Don't," Ethan rasped anyway. Why, Marcus leaned closer to check the seal around the tube. "Save your breath. You have a pen in your chest." Ethan swallowed painfully. His voice came out like broken glass. "Why did you help me?" Marcus paused. Around them, passengers leaned forward to listen. Phones still recorded. Marcus's eyes met Ethan's. For a moment, the memory returned. The finger pointing at him. The word thug. The humiliation. It would have been easy to walk away. To let Dr. Peters handle it. To let the story end differently. Marcus finally answered quietly. "Because I'm a doctor." He adjusted the tape again and checked Ethan's pulse one more time. "And because hate is too heavy to carry at 38,000 feet. Ethan closed his eyes. Tears slid into his hairline. Daniel grabbed the intercom. "Captain," he said breathlessly. "The passenger is stable, but we'll need medical personnel immediately on landing." Marcus sat back against the bulkhead for the first time. His hands trembled slightly now. The delayed shock of adrenaline leaving his system. The turbulence outside finally began to ease. The aircraft leveled. Inside the cabin, passengers whispered to one another. Phones buzzed. Because while Marcus Bennett had been saving a man's life, several of those phones had been connected to the plane's Wi-Fi. And the video of Ethan Walker screaming earlier had already begun spreading across the internet. The Boeing 777 descended through thick grey clouds toward London, while the cabin remained unnaturally quiet. No one rushed for their bags. No one complained about the delay. Every eye in the first-class cabin kept drifting back toward seat 1A. Ethan Walker lay half-conscious, strapped upright, breathing through shallow, painful gasps. The makeshift chest tube still protruded from his ribcage, a cheap plastic pen, casing taped to blood-soaked skin. The improvised valve Marcus had built from a rubber glove fluttered softly with each breath like a tiny flag fighting the wind. Marcus Bennett sat across the aisle now, watching him carefully. His hoodie had dark stains across the sleeves. Blood. Ethan's blood. Daniel Harris stood nearby, gripping the interphone, speaking quietly with the cockpit. "Yes, Captain. He's stable. Breathing on his own now." "Yes, sir." The doctor performed an emergency decompression. A pause. Daniel listened. "Understood. Emergency crews will meet us on landing." He hung up and looked at Marcus with something close to awe. "I've been flying 20 years, Daniel said quietly. I've never seen anything like that. Marcus gave a small shrug. It's just physics and anatomy. But the other passengers didn't see it that way. To them, it looked like something else. A miracle. 3 hours later, the wheels slammed onto the runway at Heathrow with a violent screech of rubber and metal. The aircraft taxied away from the terminal and stopped on a remote stand surrounded by flashing blue emergency lights. Through the windows, passengers could see ambulances, fire trucks, and airport medical vehicles waiting. The cabin door opened. Cold, damp London air rushed inside. Paramedics climbed aboard, carrying equipment bags and a stretcher. "Where's the patient?" the lead medic shouted. "Here," Daniel said, guiding them forward. Marcus stood and stepped aside. "Male, mid-50s, Marcus said calmly. "Tension pneumothorax, decompressed in flight using an improvised valve." The paramedic stopped when he saw the pen casing taped to Ethan's chest. "You did this with a pen?" he asked. Marcus wiped his hands with a towel. It was hollow. The paramedic let out a quiet whistle. "You just saved his life." Ethan groaned as they carefully lifted him onto the stretcher. Pain had returned now that the adrenaline was fading. His eyes opened briefly. The cabin looked different from the floor. Passengers leaned out of their seats watching him, but their faces held something Ethan had never seen directed at him before. Not admiration, not fear. Disgust. As the stretcher rolled past row 3, the tech founder who had been filming raised his phone again. He looked down at Ethan with a thin smile. "Better check Twitter when you wake up," he said. Ethan didn't understand. He was too weak. The stretcher disappeared through the door and into the waiting ambulance. Back on the aircraft, the tension finally released. Passengers stood slowly. Phones lit up across the cabin. People were already watching the same video. The one recorded hours earlier, a shaky clip from seat 3B, Ethan Walker standing in the aisle, pointing at Marcus Bennett. "I refuse to sit next to him." The clip cut. Another angle. Ethan gasping for breath in seat 1A. Then Marcus kneeling beside him. Blood, knife, the pen tube. The caption across the video read, "Karma at 38,000 feet. Hero doctor saves racist passenger who tried to remove him." The video had already passed 12 million views. Marcus didn't know that yet. He was gathering his bag. Daniel approached him again near the door. The captain of the flight had come out of the cockpit as well. A tall man with silver hair named Captain Robert Hayes. He extended his hand. "Dr. Bennett," he said. Marcus shook it. "Captain." "I've flown across the Atlantic for 2 decades, Hayes said. "I've seen storms, engine failures, emergency landings." He nodded toward the empty seat where Ethan had nearly died. "But I've never seen someone save a man like that." Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack. He was a patient. Captain Hayes studied him for a moment. Most people wouldn't have helped after what he said. Marcus looked toward the open aircraft door, where the ambulance lights still flashed in the rain. "My father was a village doctor," Marcus said quietly. "He'd treated soldiers from both, of a war, said a life is a life." The captain smiled faintly. "Well, the world could use more doctors like that." Marcus nodded politely and stepped into the jet bridge. He expected quiet. Customs, a taxi, maybe a shower and sleep before the medical conference he had flown to London to attend. Instead, the sliding doors into the arrival hall opened and a wall of light exploded in his face. camera flashes, microphones, voices shouting over each other. "Dr. Bennett, over here! How does it feel saving the man who insulted you?" Marcus froze. "What?" A reporter pushed forward holding a phone. The video played on the screen. Ethan Walker shouting, pointing, calling him a threat. Then the second clip. Marcus performing emergency surgery mid-flight. The caption beneath it had grown. 15 million views, 20 million. Comments scrolled endlessly. Why did he save him? Should have let him die. Hero doctor shows real class. Marcus stared at the phone. The entire world had seen it. I don't have a statement, he said quietly. Another reporter shouted, "Did Ethan Walker apologize to you?" Marcus shook his head and pushed through the crowd. He stepped into the cold night air outside the terminal and climbed into the first taxi waiting in line. As the cab pulled away, Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "You the doctor from the news?" Marcus sighed. "Yes." The driver chuckled softly. "Internet's going mad about that video." Marcus looked out the window. Rain streaked across the glass. He hadn't asked for fame. He hadn't asked for attention. He had simply done his job. But somewhere across the city, an ambulance was racing toward St. Thomas Hospital, carrying Ethan Walker. And when Ethan finally woke up, the first thing waiting for him wouldn't be gratitude. It would be consequences. Ethan Walker woke to the slow, rhythmic beeping of machines and the dull, grey light of a London morning leaking through tall hospital windows. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. His body felt heavy, like someone had poured concrete into his bones. His chest throbbed with a deep mechanical ache every time he inhaled. Then memory returned. The plane. The pain. The knife. Ethan's eyes snapped open. He looked down. A clear plastic tube emerged from the right side of his chest, taped firmly to his skin and draining into a container beside the bed. The crude pen that had saved his life was gone, replaced with a proper surgical chest tube and sterile dressings. His silk shirt was gone, his dignity with it. He swallowed and croaked. "Nurse." A nurse stepped in from the hallway almost immediately. She was middle-aged, efficient, and carried the calm detachment of someone who had seen too many emergencies to be surprised by anything. "You're awake," she said. Ethan tried to sit up. Pain exploded across his ribs and forced him back against the pillows. "Easy," she said. "Collapsed lung. Emergency procedure." "You're lucky." Ethan's first instinct returned quickly. His voice regained a trace of authority. "Where's my phone?" The nurse hesitated. "It's been ringing all night." "I need it." She reached into a drawer and handed it over. The moment Ethan powered it on, the device vibrated violently in his hand. Messages flooded the screen. Dozens, then hundreds. Missed calls from assistants, board members, lawyers. Emails stacked so quickly the notification counter froze. Ethan frowned. "What the hell?" He opened the first text. "Linda, Chief of Staff. Do not speak to press. Stay in hospital. This is bad." Ethan opened the next. "From his corporate legal team. Call us immediately." Then he opened the news notification. The headline filled the screen in bold black letters. "Real Estate. CEO Ethan Walker. Fired after racist airplane meltdown goes viral." Ethan's heart dropped. He tapped the video. The screen filled with shaky footage from the aircraft cabin. His own face stared back at him. Angry, arrogant, finger-pointing. I refuse to sit next to him. The clip cut sharply. The next image showed Ethan dying in the seat, then Marcus Bennett kneeling beside him. Blood. The knife. The pen tube. Ethan watched the comments scroll beneath the video. Hope his company collapses. Why did the doctor save him? Racists deserve what they get. Boycott Walker and Ridge. Ethan's hand trembled. The phone rang. He answered instantly. "John," Ethan said, forcing calm into his voice. "Listen, this situation is completely out of context. I can explain. You're fired." The voice on the other end was cold. John Mallory, chairman of the board. Ethan froze. "What?" "We held an emergency vote 2 hours ago," John said. "It was unanimous. The morality clause in your contract has been triggered. That's absurd. You're a liability now, Ethan. I built that company, and you nearly destroyed it overnight." Ethan's voice rose. "You can't remove me like this. We already did." Through the phone, Ethan could hear noise in the background. Crowds. Protest chants. "We have demonstrators outside headquarters right now," John continued. "People burning photos of you." Silence filled the hospital room. "You're done, Ethan. Don't come back to the office." The line went dead. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. The room felt smaller. Much smaller. The door opened again. A tall physician in a white coat entered, holding a digital tablet. "Mr. Walker," he said calmly, "I'm Dr. Andrew Collins." Ethan stared at him blankly. "If you're here about the lung," Ethan said, "just discharge me. I have things to deal with." Dr. Collins didn't sit. "The pneumothorax has been resolved," he said. "The emergency decompression performed on the aircraft saved your life." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes, I'm aware." Dr. Collins tapped the tablet. "However, when we ran your CT scan to evaluate the lung damage, we noticed something else." Ethan looked up. "What?" The doctor rotated the tablet screen toward him. A 3-dimensional scan of arteries and vessels filled the display. One area pulsed red. "This," Dr. Collins said quietly, "is a fusiform aneurysm located near your basilar artery." Ethan stared. "So fix it. It's not that simple." Dr. Collins zoomed in. The bulge sat dangerously close to the brainstem. "This artery controls blood flow to critical brain structures. If it ruptures, death is almost immediate." Ethan felt the same cold panic from the airplane creep back into his chest. "So operate." "The location is extremely deep," Collins said. "Traditional surgery would likely kill you." Ethan's voice cracked. "So what are you telling me?" Collins folded his arms. "If untreated, the aneurysm could rupture within weeks, possibly days." Silence hung heavy between them. Ethan whispered, "Then I'm dead. There is an experimental option." Ethan looked up sharply. "A flow-diverting stent," Collins said. "Inserted through the arterial system to reinforce the vessel from the inside." "Then do it." Collins didn't move. "The procedure is extremely specialized. There are only a few surgeons in the world capable of performing it." Ethan gripped the bed sheets. "I'll fly anywhere. I'll pay anything." Collins sighed. "You may not need to travel." Ethan blinked. "Why?" "Because one of those surgeons is currently in London for a medical conference." Hope flickered weakly. "Who?" Collins studied him carefully. The irony of the situation had not been lost on the hospital staff. The entire medical wing had already seen the viral video. "The surgeon's name," Collins said slowly, "is Dr. Marcus Bennett." The room fell silent. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "No," he whispered. Collins nodded. "We contacted him earlier. We didn't mention your name." Ethan stared at the ceiling. "He won't do it. That remains to be seen." Collins checked his watch. "He's already on his way here." Ethan turned his head slowly toward the door. The man he had humiliated. The man who had already saved his life once. Now the only person on earth capable of saving it again. And the footsteps approaching down the hospital corridor were getting closer. The door to the hospital room opened with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. Ethan Walker stopped breathing for a moment. Dr. Andrew Collins stepped inside first, holding the door with one hand while glancing back toward the hallway. "He's here," Collins said quietly. Ethan's heart monitor immediately sped up. Beep, beep, beep. Collins stepped aside. Marcus Bennett walked in. He wasn't wearing the grey hoodie anymore. Now he wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, the kind worn by someone who spent equal time in operating rooms and international conferences. A slim tablet rested in one hand. In the other, a paper cup of hospital coffee. His eyes were on the screen. "The vessel geometry is difficult," Marcus said calmly as he walked further into the room. "But a pipeline flow diverter should navigate the curve if we approach through the radial artery rather than the femoral." He tapped the tablet once. "Lower complication risk." Then Marcus looked up and froze. For several seconds, no one spoke. Marcus's eyes locked onto the man lying in the hospital bed. Ethan Walker. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to bend the air in the room. Collins looked between them, sensing something he didn't fully understand. "You know each other?" Collins asked. Marcus let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Oh yes," he said. Ethan swallowed hard. "Dr. Bennett." Marcus lowered the tablet slowly. His expression changed. Not anger, not shock. Something colder. Recognition. Marcus turned to Collins. "This is the patient with the basilar aneurysm." "Yes," Collins replied. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he walked toward the window and stared out at the grey London skyline for several long seconds. Ethan could hear the faint sound of traffic far below, the quiet hum of hospital machines, and his own pulse pounding in his ears. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "Less than 12 hours ago," Marcus said calmly, still facing the window, "this man told a plane full of passengers that I made him feel unsafe." He turned. Ethan felt smaller under the weight of his gaze. Marcus stepped closer to the bed. "You pointed at me," Marcus continued. "You called me a threat. You demanded I be removed from my seat." Ethan gripped the bed sheets. "I was wrong." Marcus tilted his head slightly. Were you? I didn't know who you were, Ethan said quickly. The words came out too fast. Desperate. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes. He stepped closer. That's exactly the problem. Ethan blinked. Marcus leaned forward slightly. You didn't know I was a surgeon. His voice remained calm, but every word landed harder. If you had known, you would have treated me differently. Ethan struggled to respond. Marcus straightened. That's not an apology, Marcus said. That's a transaction. Ethan's voice dropped. I can pay you. Marcus didn't react. I'll fund your research, Ethan continued. I'll donate to your hospital. I'll build an entire wing in your name. Collins watched silently. Marcus studied Ethan for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You still think money is the only currency that matters? Ethan's chest tightened. Please. The word tasted unfamiliar in his mouth. I don't want to die. Marcus looked down at the tablet again. The scan of the aneurysm rotated slowly across the screen. A swollen red bulge near the base of Ethan's brain. One rupture away from ending everything. Collins spoke quietly. If we don't intervene soon, the risk of rupture increases every hour. Marcus didn't answer. He simply stared at the image. Inside his mind, the memory replayed. Ethan standing in the aisle, finger pointing. Get this man out of my sight. Marcus could walk away. He could say the situation was too personal, that he was emotionally compromised. No medical board would challenge the decision. The internet would probably celebrate it. Let the racist die. But Marcus heard another voice instead. His father's voice. A small clinic in a rural town decades earlier. Treat the wound, not the politics. Save the life, not the argument. Marcus exhaled slowly. He looked back at Ethan, then at Collins. Prep the cath lab, Marcus said. Collins blinked. You'll do it? Marcus nodded. Yes. Ethan's body sagged against the pillows. Relief poured through him so quickly he almost cried. Thank you, Ethan whispered. I swear I'll make this right. Marcus turned toward the door. Don't do it for me. Ethan frowned. Marcus paused before leaving. I won't be there to see it. Then he looked back one final time. I'm doing this because when I took my oath, I promised to do no harm. He opened the door. Even to men like you. 6 hours later, the operating room lights blazed down onto stainless steel instruments and silent machines. Marcus Bennett stood at the head of the surgical table. His hands moved with slow, precise control. A microcatheter threaded through Ethan Walker's arterial system, guided upward through vessels thinner than drinking straws. Dr. Collins watched the monitor. The catheter advanced carefully toward the aneurysm near the brainstem. One wrong movement, one tremor. Ethan Walker would be brain dead before anyone could react. Marcus didn't tremble. His voice remained calm. Deploying stent. The platinum mesh expanded across the weakened artery wall. Blood flow shifted instantly. The aneurysm collapsed inward. Collins exhaled. It worked. Marcus stepped back from the table. Close. He removed his gloves and dropped them into the biohazard bin. 6 hours of tension released from the room. The nurses looked at him with quiet admiration. Marcus didn't stay. He walked out of the operating room without waiting for applause. Because saving Ethan Walker's life for the second time had never been about Ethan Walker. It had been about something else entirely. Ethan Walker woke again 2 days later to a quieter room and a world that felt unfamiliar. The chest tube was gone. The dull ache in his ribs had softened into a deep soreness that pulsed with every breath. A thin surgical dressing covered the incision where the tube had been. His head felt heavy, but the crushing pressure that had haunted the days before surgery was gone. For the first time in weeks, his mind was clear. But the room around him was empty. No flowers, no assistants, no board members, no family. Just the low hum of medical equipment and the grey morning light spilling through the tall hospital window overlooking the Thames. Ethan slowly pushed himself upright in the bed. The river outside moved slowly past the Parliament buildings, dark water under a cloudy sky. It was a view people paid millions of dollars for in London penthouses. Today, it felt cold. A quiet knock came at the door. A nurse stepped inside holding a clipboard. "You're recovering well," she said. "Dr. Collins says you may be discharged tomorrow." Ethan nodded slowly. "Where is Dr. Bennett?" The nurse flipped through her notes. "Dr. Bennett?" "Yes," Ethan said. "The surgeon." "Oh." She nodded. "He flew back to New York this morning." The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. "Already?" "Yes." The nurse checked his vitals quickly. He had rounds scheduled at his hospital. Ethan stared out the window again. "So he didn't want to see me." The nurse shrugged slightly. "He didn't leave a message." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest again, though not the same physical pain as before. It was something else. Regret. The nurse turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, wait," she said. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small object. "He did leave this." She handed it to Ethan. It was a small black case, crushed slightly along one corner. Ethan frowned. He opened it. Inside sat a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. The memory hit him instantly. The airplane. The tray table. The moment his arm had knocked the case onto the floor during his outburst, Marcus must have picked it up. Ethan looked deeper inside the case. Tucked into the mesh pocket was a small white card. He pulled it out slowly. Dr. Marcus Bennett, Chief of Neurosurgery, Mount Sinai Hospital, New York. On the back of the card, written in blue ink, was a short, hand-written message. "The seat next to me was always open. You just had to ask." Ethan stared at the words for a long time. The nurse watched quietly from the doorway. "Anything else you need?" she asked. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No." She left. The door closed. Silence returned. Ethan placed the card carefully on the bedside table. Then he reached for his phone. He had avoided turning it back on since the day of the surgery. But now he pressed the power button. The screen lit up instantly. Notifications flooded the display again. News alerts, emails, messages. Hundreds. Thousands. He opened the first news article. The headline glowed on the screen. Former CEO Ethan Walker loses company after viral airplane incident. Another article. Real estate firm distances itself from ex-executive after racist outburst. Another. Protests outside Walker penthouse in Manhattan. Ethan scrolled further. Stock analysts discussing the company's collapse. Activists calling for investigations into housing practices. Former employees speaking publicly for the first time. The empire Ethan had spent 30 years building was unraveling. His phone buzzed with a new notification, a message from his ex-wife's attorney. Petition filed for full custody of children due to reputational damage and instability. Ethan slowly set the phone down. The room felt larger now. Too large. The silence heavier. He looked back at Marcus's card again. 2 days earlier he had nearly died on a plane. Then he had nearly died again in a hospital operating room. Both times the same man had saved him. A man Ethan had treated like something less than human. A man who had walked away without asking for anything in return. Not money, not recognition, not even an apology. Ethan stood carefully and walked to the window. The city stretched beyond the river in grey layers of buildings and streets. People moved along the sidewalks below. Cars crossed the bridge. Life continuing. Ethan rested his hand against the glass. For the first time in decades, he didn't know what came next. His title was gone. His company was gone. His reputation shattered. The world had watched him fall in real time. And the one person who had shown him what real strength looked like had already left the country. Ethan returned slowly to the bed. He picked up the business card again. The words on the back seemed heavier now. The seat next to me was always open. You just had to ask. Ethan closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker finally understood something he had never bothered to learn before. Respect, and he had discovered it only after losing everything else. The hospital discharged Ethan Walker the next morning into a world that no longer belonged to him. Rain fell softly over London as he stepped outside St. Thomas Hospital. The air was cold and damp, the kind that seeped through expensive coats and reminded people they were still human beneath the fabric. No assistants waited, no corporate car, just a quiet taxi line along the curb. 2 days earlier, he had been a man who travelled with staff, security, and a calendar booked months in advance. A man whose name opened doors and closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now he stood alone on the sidewalk, with a small hospital envelope and a phone that had become a storm of consequences. The driver of the first taxi looked up through the windshield. "You need a ride, sir?" Ethan nodded and climbed into the back seat. "Where to?" Ethan hesitated. For the first time in decades, he didn't have a schedule waiting. Just the airport. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. London passed outside the window in wet grey reflections. Old brick buildings, people rushing under umbrellas. The Thames moving quietly beneath the bridges. Ethan leaned his head against the glass. The city didn't care who he was. That realization felt strangely freeing. At Heathrow Airport, the terminal buzzed with travelers moving in every direction. Business suits, families, students with backpacks, people with lives unfolding in ordinary ways. Ethan walked slowly through the crowd. A few people recognized him. Not admiration. Recognition. The viral video had traveled farther than he had. A couple whispered as he passed. One man shook his head. Ethan kept walking. He deserved that. His flight back to New York boarded quietly. No private lounge, no VIP escort. Just another seat on another plane. This time, economy. Ethan sat down beside an older man reading a newspaper. The man glanced at him politely. "Long flight," the stranger said. Ethan nodded. "Yes." They didn't speak again. But the silence felt different from the one on the previous flight. Not hostile, just human. 7 hours later, the aircraft touched down in New York. The skyline of Manhattan rose in the distance beyond the runway lights. The same skyline Ethan had once ruled from glass offices 40 floors above the streets. He left the airport and stepped into a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. News vans still waited outside his penthouse building. Protest signs leaned against barricades. Security guards stood near the entrance. Ethan didn't stop. Instead, he kept walking down the street until the noise faded behind him. He walked for nearly an hour, past cafes opening for the morning, past construction crews starting their shifts, past a small clinic on the corner of a quiet block. A handwritten sign hung in the window. "Free community health consultation today." Ethan stopped. Through the glass, he could see a waiting room with plastic chairs and a handful of people sitting quietly. Nothing about the place was impressive, but it felt real. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the business card. Dr. Marcus Bennett, Chief of Neurosurgery. The words on the back were still there in blue ink. "The seat next to me was always open. You just had to ask." Ethan stood there for a long moment. Then he slipped the card back into his pocket and kept walking. Because redemption wasn't something you could buy in a single moment. It had to be built. Slowly. Quietly. Piece by piece. Months later, the world would forget the viral video. News cycles moved quickly. Outrage faded. New scandals replaced old ones. But Ethan Walker would remember. Every time he boarded a plane. Every time he sat beside a stranger. Every time he saw someone he might once have judged without knowing their story. And somewhere across the country, inside an operating room filled with bright white lights, Marcus Bennett continued saving lives the same way he always had. Calm, focused, unmoved by fame or hatred. Because kindness rarely made headlines, but it always left the deepest mark. That was the real lesson of Flight 9002. Status can vanish. Money can disappear. Reputation can collapse overnight. But the choice to help another human being will always matter more than the reason they needed help. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who forgives when the world expects revenge. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing for more powerful stories like this one. And in the comments, write 3 simple words that carry more weight than any title or fortune. Choose kindness always.